Good evening, everyone. My name is Fritz Schroeder, and welcome to the History of the Conestoga River virtual lecture as part of Lancaster Water Week 2020. We are excited to have so many of you join us to learn about the Conestoga River. Lancaster Water Week was conceived along and inspired by the plight of the Conestoga River. And this evening, we are blessed with two presenters who know these challenges all too well as stormwater engineers by day and self-proclaimed history nerds by night. The Lancaster Conservancy launched Water Week 4 years ago as a way to bring more attention, education, action, and funding to the 1,400 miles of streams and rivers in Lancaster County. As a 50-year-old land trust that owns and manages over 7,000 acres of forested lands and 47 nature preserves, we know and understand the importance of these waterways, whether they are healthy cold water creeks that run through our preserves or the polluted Conestoga River, which is the main water body that runs through the heart of Lancaster County. These resources have driven our economy for hundreds of years. They are places for us to recreate and paddle, and they are the sources of our drinking water. With focused attention and on-the-ground implementation by many partners, we believe these rivers can be brought back to health in our lifetimes. Of course, tonight we're here to talk about history, and you cannot talk about history in Lancaster County without thinking of Lancaster History. We are very excited to be partnering with them on this evening's presentation, and I would like to invite Robin Surratt from Lancaster History to say a few words.
Thanks, Fritz, and thanks everyone for joining us this evening. We are really excited to have this chance to partner with Lancaster County Conservancy on this program, and while our missions are different, the origins of our missions decidedly stem from the same source. You can easily see how the cultural history and heritage of Lancaster County is inextricably intertwined with the natural history of its lands, its rivers, its streams. And so we've long felt that in order to be good stewards of our cultural history, we also needed to be good stewards of our natural history. And so we're grateful to be included in this exciting Water Week program and also just to have the relationship with the Conservancy. As you might expect, we originally had high hopes of hosting you here on site at the Campus of History, which you can see in the screenshot Kelly's got on for you. And we really wanted to give you a chance to see a three-dimensional exhibition that included our artifacts and photos and documents to tell the story of the Conestoga River. Alas, things change. But in lieu of hanging photos and artifacts on our walls, we have, to tide you over, created a digital exhibition to whet your appetite and hopefully to keep you coming back to Lancaster History, both on site and online for more in the months and years ahead. I want to really thank Stephanie Townrow for her talent and time and work curating this online exhibition. And also thank Caitlin Rossiter, who's our intern extraordinaire, for her research and content development. She's been a real asset to us for actually 2 years now. As you're going to hear from Ruth and Ben, the story of the Conestoga River is rich and varied, and it's a pretty fascinating way to approach the story of Lancaster County. And what you're going to learn from them is just the tip of the iceberg. We have about 2 million documents and artifacts here in our collection at Lancaster History, and among them are hundreds of photos, documents, artifacts that really do tell the river story and its key place in this community. So while you're stuck at home, you can actually do a little digging on your own. Feel free to go to our website, which is lancasterhistory.org, and there's a research tab. You click on that and you can type in the words Conestoga River and see what you come up with on your own. We also have folks always happy to answer questions for you. There's something on our website also called Lib Apps, Lib Answers, and it will give you access to our full research staff. So if you have any questions that we don't answer for you tonight, we're happy to do that for you in the weeks ahead. And as a side note, because we're excited about this, the process of conducting research is about to get more interesting and a lot more fun for those of you who are nighttime history nerds, Ruth and Ben. We have a discovery tool that's launching next month that will actually cull through our online databases, our library catalog, our finding aids on our website, all at once for a much more seamless process of doing research. So check back with us soon and spend some time conducting whatever of your own research you'd like to do to supplement what you're about to learn from our really fantastic speakers.
Thank you, Robin. I hope this is the first of many collaborations between the Lancaster Conservancy and Lancaster History. Lancaster Water Week continues beyond this evening with a number of virtual lectures, and we encourage everyone to take the Water Week pledge to clean our local waterways. You can learn more about upcoming events and the pledge at lancasterwaterweek.org. And finally, Water Week is only possible because of the very generous support of our sponsors. These are local organizations and businesses that are passionate about clean water. Through their generous support, we are able to host these events, and they've helped us contribute over $120,000 in grants to clean water implementation here in Lancaster County. Turkey Hill Dairy has been our presenting sponsor since the founding of Water Week in 2017. Today, I also want to recognize the City of Lancaster, Lancaster County Community Foundation, High Foundation, Atlee Hall, Eurofins, Fulton Bank, and Lancaster General Health. These organizations and businesses call Lancaster home and have invested in clean water resources. And now I would like to welcome Ben Webber, who serves Lancaster Township as its municipal engineer. He grew up and resides in Manheim Township along the Conestoga River. As a civil engineer for more than 35 years, he has always been fascinated with water. A few years ago, he asked the unfortunate question, where does the name Bridgeport come from? His thirst for local history has been unquenched ever since. Welcome, Ben.
Thank you, Fritz. Excellent. Okay. Greetings, everybody. Just a reminder to folks, this presentation is being recorded, so there might be a few images that will prompt you to rewatch and then pause for further pondering of the different images. Now, we're going to get going with the agenda. Tonight, Ruth and I are going to be covering several topics each with a little bit of overlap here and there. I'll be taking on Conestoga 101, natural forces, transportation, recreation. Then Ruth will guide you through settlement patterns, industry, conservation, the future of the Conestoga, and an overall summary. Now, Conestoga 101 is basically initial topics that just seem to come up all the time. Questions such as, is it a creek or is it a river? Where does it come from? And why are there so many bends in the Conestoga itself? Now, the Conestoga, is it a creek, is it a river? I don't really think that there are any helpful differences in definitions, and certainly nothing official that is legally binding, but somehow we connote that a creek is smaller and less impressive than a river. But it's all the same to the Conestoga itself, and you'd be hard-pressed to tell me where it changes from a creek to a river. And this centuries-long debate is going to continue with no consequence, I believe, other than the emotional attachment we have of familiarity as a creek or of pride as a river. Now, where does the Conestoga start? The real concept we need to grasp is that everywhere within the Conestoga watershed, everything everyone does to impact the land or how it interacts with water affects the Conestoga. If you're really looking for the headwaters, there's no Victoria Falls. Based on the exploration of others and a couple trips on my own, the best I can come up with is that there are a couple of substantial spring-fed farms in the hills at the easternmost tip of Brecknock Township. You can do the same by tracing or traveling the Conestoga from its mouth at the Susquehanna upstream and choose the larger channel at each juncture. But good luck in Morgantown. Now, if you get a chance to check out that Lancaster History's digital photo exhibit that Robin was sharing with you, you'll find the one that also pertains to Frank Diffenderfer's journey to this neck of the woods. What's stunning for me is this photo from 1902 of a nearly uneroded stream bed of the Conestoga with riparian conditions. Now, we just don't see that anymore. But back to the question at hand, where does it come from? I think, again, it's really of little consequence, but it does offer some romantic allure as we hope to experience some mystical wellspring. Now, the Conestoga itself looks like silly string on the wall as it twists and turns through the center of the county. How come? Over time, water does erode and it does dissolve rock. The weaker and smaller rocks give way first, but water will find its way downhill. It always wins, and sometimes it's called the universal solvent, but it does have a powerful ally in the winter whenever ice forms and expands. Well, let's consider briefly the dynamics of any riverbed. As water moves downhill, it presents kinetic energy, which is then resisted by friction from whatever the water encounters. When the water finds low spots, it fills it in. When it finds an obstacle, it rises up like an ocean wave and goes over top. Or it moves that thing along. But when it reaches flatter ground, it has to lose that energy by increasing its flow length. So the Conestoga itself reacts to the underlying rock layers, its various tributary confluences, and the relative shelf-like topography of the mid-range of the county. Now, I did kind of stuck my toe in the water on this next section, but let's flow right on into natural forces. So we've got geology, rain and groundwater, soil and vegetation, riparian areas, erosion and flooding. Each of these non-human forces impact the Conestoga. And climate change being linked to humans and changes in ground cover that are also forces that impact the Conestoga in concert with these five. As you come to your own conclusions about each of them and the role we play, please also keep in mind the underlying concept of entropy. Now, when considering the timeline of geology, you've got to think in terms of millions of years as the basic unit of measure. Before this tectonic plate that we live on rose above the water, it was at the bottom of the ocean where it collected organic matter to create our underlying rock formations. Mountains rose and then they eroded into hills. Where those hills had ridges, the water collected into drainage basins or watersheds. Within Lancaster County, the Conestoga is but one of several major watersheds. And within the Conestoga watershed itself, there are several significant tributaries, such as Mill Creek, Cocalico Creek, and the Little Conestoga Creek. These are all subject to the topography that was set by geology. Now, when that universal solvent meets stuff that was once organic matter, it's only a matter of time before the stuff yields and water finds its way downhill faster. Water really is an incredible agent of entropy. Now, this image is obviously not of the Conestoga, but it illustrates my point really well, all in one view. Mountains erode into hills, hills break down into rocks, rocks into soil, soil and water result in vegetation, and so on. The water's more powerful ally is ice, of course. During the ice ages, glaciers ground up rocks and reshaped the landscape. They left a hilly northern region, a flatter mid-range in the county, and more sloping terrain in the southern end. They also left this ridge line that's running along the Susquehanna. This is the mouth of the Conestoga, where it had to work for eons to cut through the ridge line to be able to discharge as it does today. Just imagine for a moment what that impounded water behind the ridge line would have looked like for millions of years. Now, rain hits the ground and soaks in or it runs off. In the pre-human natural setting, about 3 times as much water was able to soak into the ground than is able to on cultivated fields, let alone impervious surfaces like roads, roofs, and parking lots. Even when the Conestoga isn't collecting runoff, it is still being fed by groundwater that takes longer to reach the riverbed. Now, in terms of soils and vegetation, during the last few ice ages, glaciers didn't make their way this far south, but silt blew off of them southward, with much of it accumulating in the Lancaster region. About 60% of our soil is silt. and combined with the right amount of clay and sand, you can grow crops like nobody's business. And boy, oh boy, we did. Penn's Woods became the garden spot with nearly a clean wipe of woodlands off of the face of the county. Check out this depiction of the woodlands in green versus the farmland in tan. These trees would have soaked up lots of water and held back soil erosion that ended up being sediment in the Conestoga. Now, riparian areas, it's a natural combination of flora and fauna that are inclined to thrive along a body of water. Sometimes the body of water is flowing, and sometimes it's just a wetlands along a river. These areas sustain life. They're able to withstand flooding and generally filter out many pollutants that would otherwise end up going downstream. But they are dang difficult to create and even harder to maintain. In case you're wondering, we drained and filled in nearly every last natural riparian area that was once along the Conestoga. Now, Fortescue Cumming in 1807 wrote in his sketches of a tour to the Western country, he described his view of the Conestoga. From the hill just above, I was struck with this romantic situation of a fine bridge over the creek below, more particularly as I came upon it unexpectedly. The creek was about 80 yards wide, tumbling its rapid current over the irregular rocky bottom and disappearing round the foot of a wooded hill. This undated picture is of the Conestoga and Abram Whitmer's East King Street Bridge near Bridgeport. In the background, you can see the Conestoga Inn with barns, a few homes, and nothing but fields beyond. At the same time, the water had been impounded by the dam from the city's first waterworks, just a mile or so downstream, and here making it deeper and wider at the bridge you see. This lovely picture was taken last year along Butter Road. It looks idyllic and much like the romantic situation that Cumming described in 1807. But entropy had been at work. As early as 1830, the Conestoga having, quote, sickly banks and other undesirable attributes began to be reported. Removing the natural riparian areas and introducing non-native and invasive species to our environment resulted in chaos. More severe storms like Agnes and Irene Lee continued to damage those banks. Those huge rainfall events are no longer absorbed in the floodplains that have been created by nature over thousands of years. And we're shocked to see images like this from Agnes because of the damage to human lives, property, and to our community's infrastructure. But scour to the bed and banks of the Conestoga changed its cross-section shape, cut it deeper, and made it less able to reestablish itself as a healthy waterway. On to transportation. This section really allows me to channel my inner civil engineer of the 19th century. We're going to cover canoes and footpaths, fords, culverts and bridges, the slack water navigation, safe harbor, and the Susquehanna. Now, as you might well imagine, some of the footpath routes of the Native Americans were along the ridge lines, while others were right along the Conestoga River itself. Several of these footpaths became trails for settlers and still serve us today as well-known roads. Fur traders also used the waterways throughout the area. As we found that life in this area was desirable, we developed farms, created mills, and built homesteads. That commerce required better transportation than just canoes. We needed roads, and we had to cross the Conestoga. The first crossings were fords, where flat stones were placed to allow feet, hooves, and then wheels to get to the other side. Of course, this wasn't always feasible when the water was too high or the cargo too precious. But the name Ford has survived the centuries for at least two spots. The Deer Ford development along Pleasure Road harkens back to the old Doctor's Ford, and it marks a municipal boundary at the corner between Lancaster Township and Manheim Township. The doctor was Henry Neff, and his home was called Hardwick. I believe that the Pennsylvania Railroad Bridge obliterated both the home and Dr. Neff's Ford. The second well-known Ford is near the home of an even more well-known doctor, Edward Hand, and his home along the Conestoga Rock Ford. There are some older aerial photographs that do indicate that the ford may have connected to South Duke Street. In other places where the water flow was and is less daunting, stone culverts were installed to allow for a road to be built above. Today, we use pre-manufactured pipes or concrete box shapes. The earliest recorded bridges in the county were noted in 1716. Now, I'm no Clint Eastwood, but let's check these out. First off, there's Pine Town Road Bridge, still existing after being rebuilt once or twice. Same deal with Hunsaker. Thank you, Don Couch, for your photography. The old Factory Bridge, it's now called Duke Street. Ingleside, yes, check it out. There's separate northbound and southbound lanes in there. You know, we can do this bridge thing all evening long, but not today. Lastly, Second Lock Road Bridge, which is an awesome segue to the next topic. The road was called Second Lock because it was number 2 of 9 for canal boats to be able to travel up and down the Conestoga between the city and the Susquehanna. Now, these Native American footpaths became wider and more well used, but there wasn't much in the way of pavement. The first improvement involved the placement of logs perpendicular to the travel in boggy areas. These so-called corduroy roads involved a lot of agitation to whatever was in the wagons. We needed something quicker and less likely to damage what was being conveyed. With the Louisiana Purchase and the westward expansion, Pennsylvania tried to create a canal thoroughfare from Philadelphia to Pittsburgh as an alternative to the Erie Canal in New York. A group of enterprising Lancastrians decided to give it a go, and directing cross-state commerce here and doing it as quickly and cheaply as possible. But the cost of not listening to their engineers resulted in overwhelming maintenance costs because they simply dammed the river in 9 locations with a lock at each end and a towpath on the downriver left-hand side. The dams were a source of water power for various mills and then in some cases hydroelectric power plants. This 1940 aerial is of Lock 5 where Rock Hill access is today. And if you go out there, the dam is nearly completely gone, but some odd looking concrete structures are there. Not sure of the date of the older photo, but you can see the lock. Here's the Rock Hill power plant from the 1950s. At least 5 other power plants were similarly located at these old dams. But the timber and rock dams couldn't hold up, and the pollutants, debris, sediment, and whatever else we sent down the Conestoga got trapped behind them. This is a unique photo of the Colemanville Dam on the Peckway after it breached in 1926. Couldn't be plainer to see all the sediment and debris stacked up behind the dam. Now, in terms of safe harbor, there's a remarkable map, 1853, of Manor Township. And you can actually see lock number 8 and the only depiction I've ever been able to find of lock number 9, both along the shoreline of the village of Safe Harbor. The then navigable Conestoga became an attraction not only for commerce, but pleasure craft and passenger service connecting to Baltimore and Philadelphia. This illustration depicts the Red Rover, its mule team, passengers on the roof, and the trumpeter announcing to the lock tenders that they were approaching. You can also make out those gateway hillsides where the Conestoga empties into the Susquehanna. The story of Safe Harbor itself didn't really live up to its name, since there were more than just a few horrific cataclysms when the Susquehanna froze solid in the winter and then impacted by heavy rains in the spring, causing ice flows that rose 10 feet in a matter of minutes. These ice jams devastated the village over and over again. Now here's a 3D rendering of the area around Lock 8, which you can actually go and see in the park near Safe Harbor. The lock itself is behind a fence, but it's so far away from the banks of the river that it's hard to believe they were ever connected. Now, when the dams were built, the Conestoga was impounded and made 12 to 15 feet deeper and much wider, in some cases more than a football field across. This was done in 9 locations. Want to see that again? So there you can see the lock, and the dam, the impoundment. Now here's a neat illustration of Safe Harbor in the days of its industrialization, which relied on the slack water navigation for transportation. All right, everybody, you've waited long enough. Here comes the fun stuff, recreation. At the same time as these environmental and human impacts were converging, we were also able to simply enjoy the Conestoga in ways that are mostly vanished today. Fishing, swimming, and boating. Over at Bridgeport, we had Rocky Springs and Conestoga Park. We also had the Pennsylvania Railroad and Pleasure Road, Conestoga Inn, and boathouses. Now, fishing in the Conestoga continues today to be a pastime for folks, but the species diversity and number of fish has certainly changed. Salmon, herring, and others no longer exist here. As early as 1731, shad fishermen complained about a mill dam in Manor Township blocking the shad run. The dam was torn down, was rebuilt, and torn down again. Now, when it's hot, so cooling off in the still waters of the Conestoga was very common. Of course, if you've got it, flaunt it was as prevalent then as it is now. This private pleasure motorboat with well-appointed passengers was obviously not a rental. Bridgeport itself was a hub of very local navigation. Making the Conestoga navigable also created large step pools, miles long, hundreds of feet across, and much deeper than we normally see today. But the Bridgeport step pool had no lock to go downstream. It was impounded by a large dam for the city's first waterworks, completed in 1837. That also meant great opportunities for swimming, a little bit of boating, sunbathing, and picnicking along the shoreline. For those of you who kayak the Conestoga, you've probably seen the waterworks stone archway that's still along the river. This dam held water back all the way up past the Pennsylvania Railroad Bridge. The area became an incredible and now nearly lost recreational paradise. From old maps, photos, newspaper articles, and other manuscripts, I believe that Conestoga Park encompassed all of the blue shaded area depicted there. Much more than an amusement park, Rocky Springs offered canoe rentals, bathhouses, and promenade walkways along the Conestoga. Just getting there was a treat on the Lady Gay steamship paddle wheel boat. Along the way, you'd pass small wharfs, large docks, and a theater facility where the East King Street trolley line would have dropped you off. These bucolic vistas and placid waters must have been incredible to behold. Right across the river from Rocky Springs was People's Bathing Resort, which had an enormous slide, aquariums, and a massive roller rink. For at least a few years, a pedestrian bridge connected the two. But if you were in a hurry to get there and didn't want to wait for one of the boats, alternative transportation from East King Street was an option via the single-file miniature trolley, which ran parallel to the boulevard. Now, at the top of the Bridgeport step pool was another recreational opportunity. Here under the railroad bridge, you could dive, swim, swing out, and jump from a rope dangling down from the tracks above. Turn around and look upstream to the bridge seen today over to the city's water filtration plant. What a beach-like environment to have available to the public so close by. The Conestoga Inn was also built by Abram Whitmer and in the same time frame as his bridge. It stands today, but much of it is missing. There was a dance hall positioned partially above the Conestoga River so that you could moor your canoe underneath and go upstairs for a night of revelry. As late as the 1940 census, homes were still occupied on the water surface of the Conestoga, although I'm not sure what their utility service is, whether they'd be up to code these days. Now, things haven't always been and won't always be as they are today, but each of us has the leverage of the present time to make impacts on the future we leave behind us. There's so many organizations and people to whom I'm indebted for helping me find and present information about the Conestoga and its history. Many other researchers, writers, and advocates are not listed, but very much appreciated for their efforts and the legacy passed on to us.
Thank you so much, Ben. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Ruth Hocker, who is the Deputy Director of Public Works, Sustainability, and Environment Division for the City of Lancaster. Welcome, Ruth.
Starting back where we left off, Ben mentioned earlier that Lancaster County and and the Conestoga specifically was part of a great sea, and that's absolutely true. So prior to any human settlement here in the area, it was the floor of a great sea, along with most of the rest of southeastern Pennsylvania. And tiny prehistoric creatures that live in the water left their skeletons when they died on the seafloor. And over time, those eventually became the rich limestone that now makes up the bedrock that we have in the county, as well as some of the richest soils on the North American continent. Prior to European settlement, Lancaster was a crossroads. It was a link used by the Susquehannocks to connect with the Lenni Lenape and other Delaware Valley tribes via Indian paths like the Blue Rock Path and the French Creek Path. And they also occasionally might use the Conestoga River as a water route from the Conestoga Village near Washington Borough to the Schuylkill River in Phoenixville today, with a very short portage over land between the headwaters of the two. And as Ben mentioned earlier with some of the roads, one of those paths, French Creek Path, actually became one of the first roads laid out by the colonial courts. Prior to any of that happening though, back in 1618, French explorer Samuel de Champlain sent his interpreter and guide, Etienne Brulé, to explore the Susquehanna region all the way to the sea. And in 1618, Brulé wrote back to explorer Champlain and let him know that he had done that. Likely, he was the first European to see Lancaster County, or at least the only one that we have a record of. He was accompanied by indigenous guides on this journey, and his exploration actually opened this region to French trading with indigenous tribes for goods like beads, ribbons, knives, axes, and liquor or spirits for furs. By 1711, the first farms were operating in Lancaster County. It was formed as the county itself was formed as a part, it was cordoned off from Lancaster County in 1729, partly as a response to the need for a governmental system nearer the population centers. Lancaster and its surrounding areas were known as the Wild West in that time. The county boundary moved and expanded to include parts of what is now York, Cumberland, Berks, Northumberland, Dauphin, and Lebanon counties before settling in the current location we know today in 1813. Lancaster City became the county seat in 1730, and by 1737, the city was home to a number of shops and mercantiles with manufacturing both inside and outside the city proper. Even then, much of the business in Lancaster City focused on hospitality, which could be seen by checking out some of those numbers of requests for licenses of houses of public entertainment and to sell beer, cider, and spirits. While much of the county was employed in farming, quarrying, mining, and other industrial endeavors, tanneries were also a large industry for the area. The earliest tannery in the area that we can find records of was inside the city, built in 1738 near the intersection of what is now King and Water Streets. By 1751, the city recognized the need to provide fire suppression services for some of those residents, particularly given how much they were taking advantage of those houses of public entertainment, and took ownership of the first fire engine in 1751, shortly before the formation of the Union Fire Company, which is one of the oldest in the country. I'd like to point out here also a very interesting story about this part of the city. Ben shared with you earlier the area that may have been underwater with that dam around what is now Sunnyside. But there was an interesting decision that went into locating the city where it is. So originally, Lancaster City in its current location was considered very difficult to get to. There was an area of the city called Dark Hazel Swamp, which I'm sure some of the folks who are listening are aware of and have at least done some initial digging into. The best I can understand and identify today is that the Dark Hazel Swamp exists, what's left on the surface exists in and around the Brandon Park area of the city, as well as a few pockets of wetlands that come up along the Water Street area and then again down towards the wastewater treatment plant. The wells and springs in the city were plentiful at the time, and water was provided for all number of uses. including fire suppression over time, but largely it was done with cisterns and wells. By 1763, much of the woodland around the city had been depleted to provide wood for construction materials, manufacturing, heat and fuel, and other uses. And to help solve this problem, the city actually petitioned to remove 3 mill dams upstream on the Conestoga to allow for lumber to be floated downstream. Ultimately, that petition was denied, and those mill dams remained in place. The decision to deny that petition was based on the fact that there were far too many obstructions and too many bends in the river to float lumber from one point to another. Continuing to build and locating lumber from other sources, by 1774, magistrates began planning to sink and fix cisterns for the reception and collection of water in large quantities for use in fire suppression, and to try to pipe water from the numerous springs into the central part of the city. Some of these plans included fines for anyone who willfully or maliciously injured water pipes or obstructed the passage of water through these lines. There were also other laws by 1774, regulations and prohibitions in place within the city specifically related to water, including the prohibitions against placing a spout or gutter in such a location that the water discharged may incommode persons passing in the streets. You were prohibited from throwing dirt and clay into the streets from cellars or houses under construction, throwing any rubbish into the streets from carts and wagons. And by this time, too, the city had also installed sewers in King Street, Queen Street, and Water Streets, prompting a very specific prohibition that forbid anyone from obstructing the town's sewers. Now, if you're listening to this and you're aware of any type of civil engineering or land development, or if you even own a home in the watershed or any property, a lot of this probably sounds very familiar. You don't want to discharge your stormwater across a walkway because it will cause mud or ice. You don't want to throw dirt and clay into the streets because that will cause sediment issues in the bay. And you also don't want to throw any rubbish from your cars or Volkswagens. So it's pretty straightforward. I mean, we've been doing this stuff for a while. Ben mentioned the city water plant. In 1837, the city started operating a water wheel powered pump to bring water from the Conestoga into the city. Until 1907, water in the city was consumed and used raw. There were no treatment facilities in place at that point, but there was definitely a need for water. And in 1839, Jacob DeMuth put a bathtub in his city home. It was one of the first in the Republic. And after 8 more bathtubs were installed by others in the city imposed a fee of $3 per year for the water used to fill them. This annual fee increased over time to a maximum of $30 per year in 1849, but that price was just a little too high, and there were a lot of protests, and the fee was ultimately reduced to $16 per year. Can you imagine having to pay $16 a year to take a bath? Wonder what we pay today. By 1878, the city added 2 steam-powered pumps to the water wheel system previously installed to pump the water to reservoirs in more distant parts of the city. One reservoir, built in Buchanan Park in 1890, actually burst during its initial filling and flooded the West End before being repaired and successfully implemented. Water treatment became, the city's water was used raw and untreated until 1907, when the more familiar landscape of the city that we know today had taken form. Water treatment became standard, and streams and sewers were regularly enclosed in pipes underground to make way for more and redevelopment over the coming decades. By 1950, the impacts of this type of development, which was happening all across the county, was evident. Earl Redmond led the Conestoga Valley Association in conservation and preservation of the river, and his legacy remains today. Ben spoke of Rock Ford, which was also one of his efforts, but one of his most visible outcomes is County Park. His work and the work of others presented here and the work that we're all doing now are what inspire me to work in the watershed today. Following the Second World War, the city entered a period of urban renewal that saw aggressive demolition and reconstruction in the name of progress. This left much to be desired from a community development perspective, but at the time, Mayor Scott made the decision to halt demolition of everything except what he called the concrete jungle. In 1973, until something worthwhile was identified to replace what was being torn down. Like much of the rest of the county during this period, Lancaster was distracted from the river by rebuilding a brave new world that looked like the one that we saw in magazines and in the movies. Today, since 1975, much has changed with regard to the Conestoga River. The Clean Water Act in 1970 established national standards for water that is to be withdrawn, consumed, or used in manufacturing, collected and treated, then discharged back to the rivers and streams. Laws and regulations have been established, reviewed, revised, repealed, and reinstated within the city, the county, and at the state and federal levels over the last 45 years to improve the quality of the water flowing to and through the Conestoga River. Today, municipalities work together with their residents and each other to develop consistent regulation around water. Farmers continue to work to preserve the soil on their fields, which they need to raise our food. And manufacturing techniques are improving as well to reuse as much water as possible before discharging and drawing new. The population of the county has grown substantially from those humble beginnings. The map you can see now shows the Conestoga River watershed from space. The dark green areas are what's left of those trees and forest stands. And the gray colored streaks that you see around the center of the county and sprawling out from the city, those are those concrete jungles that Mayor Scott referenced. Those are shopping centers, malls, low density housing, and other construction that has helped build the county into the home we know and love. Continuing growth and all that means remains a threat to the life of the river and the watershed and everyone living in it, unless we begin to think outside the big box store standard and start working to cease unnecessary urban sprawl while working in a concerted manner to take meaningful actions to improve the watershed. In the 15 years between 2001 and 2016 alone, Pennsylvania lost almost 250,000 acres of farmland to low density, large lot subdivisions. And that's not a mistake. That was an intentional choice, and we can talk about that offline. Additionally, the county's plan for growth through 2040 identifies about 60 square miles of development potential as growth areas. They're also forecasting that an additional 18% of the upper watershed may become impervious in the next 20 years. We're going to build more of those concrete jungle areas. An increase in impervious cover to that extent will have a significant impact on the already non-attaining Conestoga River and will only be exacerbated by additional development and land alteration that happens outside of those designated growth areas. So 18% is really almost a minimum. It's also worth noting here that the 100-year floodplain elevation near the Sunnyside Peninsula at the Circle Drive was 259 feet prior to 2016. In 2016, though, FEMA updated the floodplain maps, and that elevation was actually raised to 263 feet. A 4-foot increase in flood elevation over 11 years is pretty significant. When we look at that in the context of the additional 18 or more % of concrete jungle, and consider that in the context of recent precipitation trends indicating more frequent and more intense rainfall events interspersed with longer periods of drought, this is particularly vital when we consider how we direct redevelopment that is planned and unplanned within the watershed. I've seen it in the comments, and I will say it again now. The time to begin is now. Everything that we do and everything that we don't do impacts our watershed today and tomorrow. This is one of my favorite quotes by Leo Tolstoy. Rivers are places that renew our spirit, connect us with our past, and link us directly with the flow and rhythm of the natural world. It is also our connection to the future. Without water, humanity has no future. So let's start building ourselves a clean watershed and a clean water future today. Thank you and have a wonderful water week. Ben, to answer more specifically, but the bridge that Ben depicted in the Bridgeport area is absolutely still there and still visible, very visible.
The bridge that is visible today is actually a replacement in the 1930s as part of the Public Works Act during the Depression. The stone arch bridge had 9 arches, but it was only 19 feet wide. So you weren't able to have the 4 lanes of traffic with a sidewalk on the side of it. So that bridge is quite gone. There are a few other, very few multi-stone arch bridges. The one that comes to mind is close to Pinetown. It's a lovely arch bridge that you can see if you get out of your car and carefully take a look. There are a few others that are throughout the county as well.
Is there any information on paddling the Conestoga or any fast water portages that people should be concerned about? Low water areas? Do either of you want to take a stab at answering paddling questions around the Conestoga?
Is that okay, Ruth?
Yeah. Go for it.
There is obviously concerns about the safety around fast water and the healthfulness of being in portions of the Conestoga as it is an impaired waterway. Ruth did a remarkable job explaining some of the science and some of the impacts that we've had as humans on the Conestoga's healthfulness. But there are still some intrepid kayakers and boaters and tubers that go out there, and hopefully everybody gets a real good scrubbing shower when they get out. But there's a terrific Facebook group called Conestoga River Club, and I'm thrilled to serve on the board. Todd Roy is an incredible advocate for the Conestoga. Not only are they trying to help people get kayaks and get into the water and get out of the water, they're great about helping people know how long it takes to get from point A to point B, and things to be careful about. Plus, they've been out there this week cleaning up the trash. So God bless them, and so thankful that everybody who's out there on kayaks and tubes and paddle boards, that they're having a great time. Just love it.
Yes, and Ben, I have to say thank you for your service on that board. I am a member of that group, and to the person who posed that question, everyone there is exceptionally friendly and is as wonderful as you are, I'm sure, in wanting to get you out on the water.
They've been a great assistance this week in our Conestoga Plus virtual cleanup. So triple shout out for the Conestoga River Club. Did either of you find anything in your research about the landfills that were once along the banks of the Conestoga River?
I did not look into that specifically, no.
I did read some writings. Ruth mentioned Earl Redmond. Earl referred to old dumps and solid waste being put into the river. None of that was compacted or put into any kind of liner. So I imagine in 1972, when Agnes came through, it took hold of everything that we'd thrown in the river and just shipped it on down to the bay. So yeah, I'm pretty sure there was a lot that was thrown into the Conestoga, but most of it got scoured out along with its natural bottom.
Do either of you have a favorite bit of trivia about the Conestoga River? Something perhaps we don't know, some anecdote.
I do. Ben, do you have one? Would you like to go first?
Sure. Well, aside from stogies, there is the Conestoga spaceship references in Star Trek. So that's my favorite one, is that somehow the Conestoga got blasted into space, at least in her mind.
And for me, I think the neatest bit of trivia that I have around the Conestoga and the city actually comes from 1737. And I wrote some notes, so bear with me while I read them. But basically, in October of 1737, Water made a daring jailbreak in the county possible, and in the city possible. So according to the reports that I read and the stories that I read and the research that I did, a gang of about 20 men, taking advantage of the river being rideable and a warm night, went to Lancaster and broke into the jailer's house, which was right next door to the prison, held the jailer and his family at gun and sword point, took the keys from the jailer's desk, unlocked the prisoners, and the whole group passed the river before morning. And they left the keys for the jailer and his family to let themselves out after they had gone. That's my favorite little piece of trivia, just because it's got everything: action, adventure, and daring.
Fantastic. One last question. If you could bring back one form of recreation on the Conestoga, what would it be?
For me, it's swimming. I grew up in the northern reaches of the Susquehanna watershed, and I was surrounded by clean streams as a child, and I spent endless summer days swimming and stomping in those waterways. And that is the one thing that I really hope for future generations to enjoy in the Conestoga.
I agree completely, Ruth, with the future generations, because I don't think I'm ever going to get in the Conestoga to go swimming. We were just up in the Loyalsock Creek last week, perfectly clear to the bottom. It's just phenomenal. But I really hope that someday we can get the Conestoga to be an environmentally viable, biodiverse waterway. So yes, I would love that to occur, but there's a whole host of things that are going to happen first. Some that are easy and some that are damn hard. Excuse my pun. So yeah, that would be something that would be lovely to do. Continued kayaking and improvements of portages and access, I think, would be the shortest term thing, the easiest thing to get done in terms of recreation.
And if I can just add to that, Ben, you were spot on. There is a lot of heavy lifting to be done to get fishable, swimmable waters in the Conestoga. But I do have hope. Everything that you do and I do and the Conservancy do and the Conservancy's partners do, as well as the townships and the city and other municipalities, we're all working towards the same goal. I just think now is the time to start working a little bit harder.
Or way harder.
Or both at the same time.
Well, you both are incredible partners, both as stormwater engineers with Lancaster Township and the City of Lancaster. And it's been a true joy to delve into history with you. And I certainly hope that this is the first of many excursions that we do together, both virtually and in person, around the history of the Conestoga River. I know Ruth and Ben and all of us were determined to clean up the river. And some of that starts with educating ourselves, right, about the history. And Ruth, I would love to see Lancaster County in 1618. The vast size of the forests and mature trees must have been something to behold.
Brulet's journal is available to read, and he gives a fantastic description. Unfortunately, photos weren't an option back then.
I can only imagine what lives were like in those streams back then, what existed in those streams, what sort of food people were eating, and Dark Hazel Swamp fascinates me. We've had many a conversation about that already. And Ben, you mentioned the natural forces, and after last Friday, where we experienced flash flooding and many of our watersheds overflowing with 4 inches of rain, I think of those natural forces and how prevalent that is and very present of mind. And transport me back during those hot summer days like we've just experienced to Rocky Springs or People's Bathing Resort. And I believe Ben mentioned canoe parking at the local dance club or pavilion. Yeah, I would love that. Please sign me up. The history of the Conestoga has a lot to teach us, not only about former uses, but perhaps also informing future uses. And I know that's what's inspiring us all to be here tonight. And I look forward to working with you on that. A couple closing things in relation to Water Week. If you have not taken the pledge kit, or our pledge. We do have the Water Week Pledge this year as a virtual action step where you can create habitat on your own properties, go out during the virtual Conestoga cleanup and pick up trash in your neighborhood, in your inlets, in your local parks and streams. And you can join us for 3 more pledge kit pickup locations this coming Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. So please sign up. You also get a free native tree and native pollinator available. And of course, we're encouraging people to plant habitat and transform your yards whenever you can. And we've mentioned the Conestoga cleanup a number of times. We've got a number of other lectures coming up this week, including pollinator and rain garden design, which is right in line with the habitats. That's tomorrow afternoon at noon, and that's also in partnership with the City of Lancaster and Kate Austin. We have the Faith in Action Creation Care for Clean Water Wednesday evening. And then another very popular one that I think people will really enjoy is The Hidden World of Stream Insects by Stroud Water research scientist who has absolutely incredible underwater photographs that everyone, I'm sure, would love to see. And there's a lot there to learn about how these organisms clean our local streams and rivers. With that, I would like to thank everyone for tuning in. It's been an interesting journey getting through this with all the weather and technical difficulties, but that's technology. And deep gratitude to Lancaster History, Robin and her team, as well as Ruth, Ben, and Kelly here with the Lancaster Conservancy. We look forward to seeing everyone again soon. Have a wonderful evening. Thanks, everybody.